So, hello. Today we've got Anna Watt. She's a security and safety expert with a focus today on gender-specific travel safety. So, hi, Anna. Welcome.
Hello, Darren. Hi, thank you for having me.
No, super. Thanks very much for coming. It's male heavy. It's ex-military or ex-police, but you're none of those. So, how did you get into this?
Yeah, no, it can be, but there are also some really brilliant women working in safety and security. But yeah, a lot of people coming into doing what I'm doing, which is NGO safety and security, have a background that's ex-military, and predominantly, actually, the number of people are male. And I was looking at pictures just last week from a big security event for the NGO world, and I was still shocked at just how many white in their 40s, 50s, and 60s men there were. And I did find that quite alarming. So, how I got into it, had a curiosity with the world and people in it. And I spent a lot of my summers at university volunteering overseas in some really rural locations and often not the safest environments. And then I traveled quite a bit after those volunteering placements. And then I got into working for a social enterprise and traveled quite a bit with that. And then ended up working for NGOs. And it was at a time when I was working for NGOs, 2015, when the landscape really was changing in terms of safety and security and duty of care. 2015, you have the Steve Dennis case. And that's really as well kind of when I started getting more involved in safety and security. So there were more roles opening up. There was a recognition that duty of care isn't just a moral responsibility, it's a legal one. So we need to have the right policies, processes, and people in place. So I've been in this sector, for a long time now. I work for UNICEF UK at the moment, and I've been there for nearly 8 years, and I'm part-time there. So when I'm not at UNICEF UK, I work really across the sector with some businesses, with some smaller kind of social enterprises, startups, and I support them with their duty of care and security risk management. And I also do a lot of training for people going to a whole range of environments where there's safety and security risks.
So, actually, quite an interesting topic that you just touched on there, which I wasn't expecting, was the Stephen Dennis case. Do you think that was so for those that don't know, it's definitely worth looking up. It's the Norwegian Refugee Council kidnapping in 2015 in Kenya. But do you think that was a turning point? That was like the big publicity, the court ruling in Oslo is what has brought this suddenly to people's minds?
I think it's a combination of Steve's case and the number of incidents affecting aid workers. And also, instant reporting got better at agencies. But if you look at kind of the shift 15 upwards, the number of incidents affecting aid workers is really, really huge. And last year, 2024, had the most number of incidents affecting aid workers. So it's still growing. Steve's case, I think, did get a lot of press attention. It also really interestingly was very supported by the sector in the way in which Steve crowdfunded and the way in which Steve also really generously talked very openly about his experiences. I think one of the things that the Steve Dennis case really highlighted was that need for psychosocial support after incidents. So Steve says that they were really happy to kind of support him with his physical injuries, but his mental injuries, his inability to work was not provided for in a well space. So I think also, whilst driving that duty of care conversation, it also made people think a lot better about, okay, what is our well-being support for staff, particularly following these kind of incidents?
I mean, I haven't, but it sounds like I've primed you because that was our last podcast, which was trauma risk management,
Yeah.
which was Tony Ward, which was it was about that exactly in terms of just the internal systems to make sure that individuals post-incident. Anyways, we digress going backwards. Okay, so we talked about the fact that, can I put you on the spot? We've just said that like a lot of security advisors seem to be male.
Yep.
What's the ratio of NGO workers, male, female split? Because my understanding, certainly from what I've seen in support, is that it seems to be, and I could be wrong, I've only had haven't seen it all, but it would seem that the majority of the workers and travellers would seem to be female. Now, I don't think it's necessarily a clear split, but from my side, there is a split, and yet, therefore, we have a load of male providing support. And if we're going into our understandings of the threats, men's appreciation of threats are very different to females, I'd argue.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts? Am I wrong?
I think it depends where you're working. So I think in some scenarios, some situations, there are more men in the field than there is women. And that is maybe kind of cultural, or it's the type of work that people are doing, or what the acceptance level is. I'd say certainly in the UK, So you're looking at UK employed staff. There's definitely more women than men. And in all the jobs I kind of do that are UK based, so we're looking at like UNICEF UK, Unlimit Health, Practical Action, there are more women traveling from the UK than there are men.
Okay, that makes sense. And you've travelled high critical as a lone female at times.
Yeah, I have.
So what kind of experiences have shaped, your view of it all, or your understanding, your perception?
Yeah. I mean, purely as a tourist, I've done some hugely inadvisable things. Quite a long time ago in Uganda, I went out on a fishing boat to the Sese Islands to stay with a man who owned a tiny remote island out there. And the only way out was by the fishing boat that came once a week. Terrible experience. Don't really know how I came out alive from that. And I've also, through the work travel that I've done, had a lot of experience of maybe wanting to seem braver than I was. One of my most embarrassing stories is I was working for Rally International. I was their safety and security manager. I'd gone out to Nepal. I'd gone out for a whole month to do an audit. Rally International in Nepal had what they called a field base with medics. At the end of my time working there, I went off and did a 3-day trek. Came back from a trek severely dehydrated. Was staying in a hotel probably only a couple of miles away from that field base with medics. But I was so embarrassed that I was the safety and security manager and was so severely dehydrated, didn't tell anyone. And now, like, gosh, I'm 10 years, 12 years older than that. I would kind of seek that support. I would speak out. But sometimes that kind of confidence comes with age. And therefore, I think it's really important that confidence that you get as an older person working, that you share that with younger people. I was running a training just a couple of weeks ago in Islamabad, and there was a real difference between the confidence level in managing situations between the younger women that I was training and the older women. And what the older women had to share with the younger women was fascinating, and also that empowering, and hearing it from someone that like you really, really respect as well.
So do you think, and maybe this cuts across the genders, you've got a younger generation coming in, they're trying to carve a niche, or they're trying to build their reputation. Do you feel they're more likely, and again, there's a degree of inexperience there, I suppose, do you think they're more likely to take those risks?
I think it really depends on like what the context is and what the environment is like for women as well. I think women may take risks because they feel like they have to prove themselves in that environment, particularly if you're in a male-dominated environment.
That's interesting. I mean, I had a really good conversation with a videographer who had traveled all over the world, and she had some incredible experiences, some very positive ones, some incredibly negative ones. But when she was telling me about some of the things that she'd done in her early years in order to make her mark, you sit there just thinking, how did you get away with that? And she said the same herself. She said, I was danger close to some terrible things because I felt, I've got to make this happen.
Yeah.
So, okay. So in terms of you're talking about the empowerment of young and old, is that younger and older, I should say, rather than young and old? I'll end up slaughtered for that comment. Is that where we kind of bridge the gap through that conversation? Is that essential, or do you think the younger generation coming through are actually pretty astute?
Yeah, I think actually it's that collection. I think the older generation are not as astute on digital safety and security. Yeah, it's actually all about kind of like learning from one another. And some people have no idea what a deep fake is, whereas your younger generation much more astute.
So we touched on it a minute ago. We were talking about tech facilitated gender-based violence. What does that look like, broadly?
So it's using technology as a form of gender-based violence. So that might be things like getting loads of messages through to your Instagram, and when you block one person, that same person appears again. A lot I hear of from women globally is someone managing to get your phone number. So that might even be things like your Uber driver who also has like your address and knows exactly where you live, constantly harassing you, asking you out on a date, asking you for coffee. Other forms are messaging, inappropriate messaging through things like Teams channels, WhatsApp, etc. And it's using technology as usually a form of harassment, but also sometimes as a form of extortion. So it might be that women are targeted. Someone that I worked with the other week was telling me they got a phone call from somebody saying, "Oh, we've got your son and we're going to do this to him." And she knew they didn't. And yet that's using technology. It's using kind of like phone calls. It's using messages to say, "We've got your son." And she was very well aware that they hadn't. but using that as a form of extortion. And potentially in a different kind of scenario where she wasn't in the same room as her son, she might have had a kind of more heightened response to that or the demands of that. And again, that's really context depending. If you're somewhere where there is a high rate of kidnap for ransom, something like that can be really tricky. And then you're looking at things like deep fakes, etc., using AI to record and distort voices. By far the most common form of tech-facilitated gender-based violence that I see globally is things like your Uber driver's got your number and they're constantly asking you out on dates. Might be that the police have got your number, the police give their brother the number, and he says, oh, I know that you went into the police station the other day. Can I help you with this? Do you want to go for coffee? Really, really challenging situations for women.
Well, it's certainly very different. I mean, I'd be intrigued to know how few men have ever had that happen. And certainly when I've been running hostile environment awareness training, certainly when I first started, and a female on the course said, when I've arrived in a hotel, checked in late at night, and then next thing the concierge is banging on the door. For what reason? No reason. And then actually there were a few more hands and they were just began to roll from there. And some said, oh, I had that in wherever I was. And it went on. And subsequent heat courses, the same conversation. This was not just a one-off in one place. This was an international issue where lone female traveller then becomes harassed. And it became a deeper discussion for us as to just in terms of, what you do. I mean, what you do in the immediate in terms of locking down and making sure the individual can't get into your room. And then actually the next issue, which I suspect is going to your organisation and going, not acceptable, get me out of here and get me somewhere that's, that's better than that. But have you experienced, I'm not asking you as an individual, but you and your role, is that something which you still see a lot of?
I mean, personally in hotels, I cannot count the amount of times I've gone up and down in lifts because I felt unsafe with another man in the lift that's asked questions. So what roomie number you in, who are you working for, what are you doing in the country? And there's absolutely no way in those scenarios that I'm going to get out on room 4, have someone follow me and come to my room. So I've gone up and down and up and down and up and down. And certainly hotels and accommodation, I feel like universally present a lot of risks for women. The same as if you're in a kind of a compound in Dadaab in Kenya, you've got the same risks for women in a hotel in Geneva.
Do you know what? I think that is, I'm preaching to the converted here, but I think there's a naivety which suggests, as soon as you go medium high, then you have to start worrying about these things. I'm like, actually, no, there's no reason why you couldn't be in a hotel in, Copenhagen, but Copenhagen and find that, which sits in a very comfortable low risk. But there's a reality to there are still certain crimes that will take place within low and they still have a significant impact. Can I just go back? Because I want to record this as a top tip. You saying, and I think this is a confidence thing and a belief thing, is that you just went, well, I'm not just going to get out of the lift now. You've already looked 2 stages ahead to, I'm with an individual, I don't like it. There's a problem here. And rather than just going, I'm sure it'll be okay, which we have always say, if it feels wrong, it is wrong. And you're saying, actually, no. I'm just going to go up and down in this lift. I'm going to hold the time until I'm in control of the situation again, which would be I've walked past my room before when I felt someone's far too close. I'm like, nope, I'll just go straight past my room because I don't need them to know where I am. So I think that's really good. And I suppose just highlights that confidence thing of going, not right, isn't right, and to deal with it. So that's pretty bleak. Lifting. What have you got from an uplifting perspective or things that have been really positive that have, you have managed to affect and change? I suppose it doesn't have to be uplifting and fairy dust and beautiful rainbows, but what else has gone right?
I mean, like we've talked about, like it's never been more dangerous to be a humanitarian aid worker. There's things like airstrikes, shelling, assault, attacks, kidnapping, shooting. There's still a really huge risk of car accidents and the fatal 3 around that. You're speeding, your seatbelts, phones. But there's risks for everyone when they travel. So we might think of Geneva as really safe, but risks to personal security are still there. Like we've talked about hotels, crime, etc. I think one of the most empowering things for me is knowing that individuals know how to keep themselves safe and we need to listen to them. I was running a training for quite a small international NGO with their East Africa team. They were talking through incidents, what had happened to them and what they'd done to resolve them or what the organisation had done. And this lady told me a really distressing experience where she went out inspecting crops. There was just her and the farmer. They went really deep into the field and she was sexually assaulted. absolutely horrific. But her solution was so simple and it was actionable the next day, which was all of the organisation's drivers, when they take lone women to go and do crop inspections, have to come with them. And it meant what happened to her is never going to happen to her colleagues. People know how to keep themselves safe. And what we need to do in organisations is have a culture that listens and responds really speedily.
That's incredibly brave of that individual. And then, one, to have to deal with that situation, but two, to be then on the front foot to go, this is the solution. I mean, awful that there has to be a solution in the first place, but nevertheless, impressive. So when it comes to how do organizations empower? Actually, no, I'm going to go back one personally. So I have 3 boys. And so my view is an education piece for them. But of course, I suppose because of the nature of the work I've done, I have a slightly different understanding from the gender perspective. Again, because I've been able to listen and hear the stories, events, experiences, etc. And that does, it certainly should change your view. So I'm very lucky in that respect to have had that additional insight. But actually, it's not particularly complex either. From my perspective, go back to the 3 boys, I think it's an education piece. And how do we do that? Right. So that's those 3. I've only got 3 people to educate there, if we're really breaking it down. Generally, it's men that are the perpetrators. I know when we talk about violence against women and girls, there are subsets of female on female. I understand that part. And how do people protect themselves? And I'm not even sure if that's a fair statement, but what's the answer, Anna?
I mean, I think men need to do better and they need to be better allies. And you're entirely right. And you said it's about how we raise our children, but that's also how we raise our girls and how we allow people to speak to them, comment on what they're wearing, comment on their weight, comment on their hobbies. It's not just about how we kind of raise our boys. I think safeguarding is really, really important. I think culture is really important. So you establish in organizations what's okay and what's not okay. And that aren't these gray areas. When I was training in Pakistan 2 weeks ago, one of the women said, there is no brother or father relationship in the workplace. So they cannot have men saying to them, I'm like a father figure to you, I'm like a brother, because that just opens up for confusion. It's a professional workplace. Knowing lines, I think, are really imperative. So having policies in place, codes of conduct, but don't have them sat on the shelf. They really, really need to be lived and breathed. You need to build culture. You need to make sure everybody, from your guards outside your office that are externally contracted to your head of finance, knows what the code of conduct is and knows what that means. And people also really need to know what the repercussions are. What is going to happen if you don't follow that code of conduct? I think organizations need to have a zero tolerance. People, particularly women, need to see action quickly. If you've gone to your safeguarding focal point and reported somebody, you don't want to see them in the same toilet as you the next day. I think it really critically goes back to believing survivors, and in particular believing women. Listen to women. Individuals know how to keep themselves safe, and people with different profiles, and particularly people with protected characteristics, know even more how to keep themselves safe. So listen to them. The context might be different, but they know how to keep themselves safe. Organizations really need to avoid placing that burden solely on women. So responsibility needs to sit with the organization and its leadership. I think in responding to incidents as well, it needs to be survivor-centred. We've seen some really bad practice in the aid sector, the humanitarian sector, in responding particularly to sexual violence incidents, and they absolutely need to be survivor-centred. And we need people to go in that and what it is.
I mean, it's interesting you talk about the policy thing. I've just trying to think off the top of my head, I know 2 cases that were brought to our attention as a consultant where nothing was then done. In one of the cases, something was done. In the other, just swept away.
Yeah.
And you're sat there just thinking, well, that doesn't give anyone else a great deal of confidence, does it? That if it happens, that just becomes, oh, this is the norm. This is accepted norm. And actually, it's quite empowering for those people that are doing it, because then they go, well, get away with it. They're not going to do anything. They've got a policy, maybe, but they don't use it. Rather than just going, do you know what, we're going to be there. And I think, again, my concern is that those in leadership positions think, oh, but what about reputation? Oh, no, what about, tell you what, it's going to be a lot worse if it comes out that you did nothing, in my view.
I think there's been a really big shift in that. And there was a really notable Aid 2 movement in the sector. And at the time that Aid 2 movement came out, 86% of aid workers said that they knew a colleague who has been a survivor of sexual violence on the job in their workplace.
Yeah, that's, I mean, that's not the, I don't even know where to go with that, Anna. I'm sorry. It's just, yeah. So when it comes to so it's an education piece across the board, I think, I'm going to sit here and say, you know, blokes need to get better. And I think there's definitely to do with that. I think when you're sat there at, 90 kilos standing over the top of someone else, you go, oh, that's just my size. It's just who I am. And you don't realize that actually, if you were 90 kilos and you had someone 180 kilos stood over the top of you, you might be like, oh, crikey, it's quite threatening. But we don't generally have that. So our views and our feelings on threats, I walk down the street at night. What am I most worried about? Might lose my phone. Oh dear, I've lost my phone. Whereas I suspect the females gone beyond losing the phone. That's probably the least of their concerns.
Yeah. And actually, like, that perception is so interesting. A university did a study, and it was about what men see at night and what women see at night. And the picture for the women, you look so broad. Men just look where they're going, but women are spotting danger. And I think for me as well, it's believing that data, accepting, like, this is the world we live in, accepting gender-based violence. I mean, in London in the last few years, we've got Sarah Everard, Zara Lena, Sabina Nessa, Natalie Schotter. They were killed because they were women alone. And that needs to be accepted, that they were only killed because they were women. Being abducted from the street is really rare, which is what happened to a lot of those women. But violence at the hands of men is not. A woman is killed by a man every 3 days in the UK. And whilst those incidents are really shocking and harrowing, what's behind all of that isn't. And the faces that aren't in the front page of the newspaper. Where Sarah Everard was killed, I've walked so many times at night. Where Sabina Nessa was killed, I've walked. Zara Lena was killed on my running route that's 3 miles from my house. It's really close to home for me.
Yeah, I mean that's the again, the interesting part is the fact that the media don't hold on to these things. We get it on a kind of rotation, and it pops back up and then it disappears again. But from my side, I don't see a massive change having taken place. We drive into it quite hard at the time. We certainly make noises about it. We generally, but then and it drifts again. And having spoken, police officer friends, again, it's just stark the fact that we can't. Everyone, all these organizations are under a boatload of pressure. So in terms of the individual, how does the individual protect themselves? You talked about the individual already knows how to protect themselves. Do you think there's more that can be done in terms of the individual going, look, actually, I appreciate I am, open to a degree of risk.
Yeah.
How do I fix that myself? Or is it just trained into you through life and nature?
Yeah. I think from a female perspective, certainly like me and my friends with Sarah Everard, Zara Lena and Sabina Nessa's murders, people getting Ubers home, avoiding certain tube stations. There was so much more checking in, and technology evolved as well, where you can kind of use my live location. I said to my partner the other day, I was like, do you always check that your mate Jim gets home safe? And he's like, no, I don't have one single female friend I would leave at a pub and not check in that they got home. And if they didn't, I would be calling them till 2 a.m. and then I'd be going around to their houses. It is just so completely different. In terms of women keeping themselves safe, they need to know the risks. So when we're talking about like travel safety and security, knowing your context, knowing your environment, what are the GBV stats in that country? But also, what's the law? What are the social norms? What are the customs? What are the gender specific dynamics as well? So you need to know what your risks are. And as much as you need to kind of know what kind of target that location is for terrorism, you need to think about those through a gender lens. Know the controls. So what has your organization got in place and what don't they have in place? Remembering as well that like you, particularly as an employee, like you have to give informed consent to travel. You look at that risk assessment, see those risks, and it says pick up a taxi from booth number 3 with the yellow cars. If you're like, no, I've just come off a night flight, I don't think I'll be able to find that, and that doesn't feel safe to me, like say it. Get an airport pickup, get the organization's driver to pick you up. So know what controls are in place, but put better ones in if they're not good enough for you. Also appreciate that like the controls that you put in place when you travel to those higher risk locations are going to be quite different. So it is things like you're going to have to call your driver to check that it is the right person. You're going to have to ask for ID. When you're in your hotel, you're going to be really, really conscious that no one shouts your room number, that you don't give your location away by like having your card on the table with the number on it. Like sometimes I've stayed in hotels where I've had like a big number wooden 8 I go to the hotel buffet, get myself a cup of tea, go and sign for something. I'm literally letting the whole room know that I'm in at number 8. And you can't let people do that. A lot of it is actually having that time to prepare. So thinking through particularly those kind of like trigger points on your journey, which is often like when you're on the move, arriving at airports, getting to the hotel, getting to the office, getting to maybe like a field office, thinking through those, knowing what to do if something does go wrong. Who are you going to call? And are they going to answer? Is that also going to be an assistance company? So you're going to be calling someone like Helix or SOS, or are you actually going to call your organization, and what are they going to do? A lot of it as well is building confidence, and that confidence comes from awareness. And then I would always say training, and that gender specific training as well gives you that space with other women to talk through things that only you experience. It gives you that platform. You don't have anyone mansplaining or manspreading, taking up the space, and you can learn from other women. You can have that dedicated space, but also work through likely scenarios. There's things people would never have thought of. So for example, ask for a female police officer. People said, I didn't know if I could do that. And someone else in the room will say, yeah, it's within your rights to do that. So training as well, thinking through and anticipating those risks. Often when we travel for work, we do it in a real rush. Like we're trying to kind of get everything ready before we go. And we don't give ourselves enough time to kind of think through, okay, what could go wrong and how am I going to mitigate that?
Yeah, you just get handed a rather generic, here's your threat and risk, great, off you trot, but it hasn't taken into consideration you as an individual and what you might face based on, the fact that each one of us is very, very different.
Yeah.
It's interesting. So I got asked a long time ago, could you, by an organization, and again, security manager rings up, can you give a briefing on use of an armored vehicle? Yeah. There was a degree of safety briefing before that, but they wanted really to focus in on armored vehicle. Lone female traveler. She was going back to Afghanistan. She was an Afghan national, but was going back to work in one of the ministries. So we did our brief on bits and pieces, went through that, and then began talking about, I said, right, I'm going to brief you on armored vehicles now. And she goes, okay, fine. Got into the armored vehicle bit, and there's only so much you can talk about an armored vehicle for. And she said, Darren, do you mind if I just stop you there? And I said, no, absolutely. I said, I've been blown up in an armored vehicle before. Okay, I haven't. I said, she goes, so I'm really okay with it. I was like, right, fine. She said, but I'd like to go back to meeting safety. Can we talk about that a bit more? About preparing for that meeting, understand who's going to be in the meeting, where you position yourself, how you control that meeting as best you possibly can to keep yourself safe, and knowing when to just go, this is fascinating, but I need to go. And extracting herself from that situation, because she said she has, despite being an Afghan national, her biggest concern about going back into Afghanistan was not being blown up, because she'd been there and done that. It was going into a meeting as a lone female and not knowing necessarily what she was going to face. And again, that was another one of those moments you just go, ugh, I'm more worried about getting blown up in a P6. And this individual's just going, there's nothing I can do about that, but I can potentially do something about that. And that was a real eye-opener for me.
Yeah.
Incredible.
There's a really popular soundbite, which is men who do tech dating, so Bumble, internet dating, they worry about being laughed at, and women worry about being killed. And I think it's really, really real.
Yeah, I mean, I can absolutely understand that, why that would be the case. I mean, for me, it seems really obvious, but I think, again, that education piece, and hopefully everyone will start to go, oh yeah, this is not that difficult. No, it's really not. Cool. This has been awesome. Right. So before we finish, I've got one final question, if I may. We've got organizations, they say they're serious about empowering staff. What are the non-negotiables for that the non-negotiables that you need to prioritize for the future?
Yeah. So the safety and security, it's having the right people in the right roles, but also in the right places. Like, you're going to need security staff in Sudan, South Sudan. You may not need them in Rwanda. And recruiting really good people. So I think for me and a lot of my colleagues doing similar roles in the sector, the worry is that with humanitarian and international development sector funding cuts, and I'm thinking specifically about USAID because that was so enormous and so quick, is that you're going to lose your security staff. You're going to lose your safeguarding staff. You're going to lose your health support teams. And those people really underpin a lot of the systems, the policies, procedures, and also the training, the support, and it's just going to be missed. As a trainer and someone that loves training and learning and development, like, don't skimp on your training. Don't move everything to online if it needs to be in person. You can't complete a risk assessment if you're not trained in how to do it. And adults learn by doing. So in things like your heat training, etc., you got to practice being shot at. to know what you're going to do. You're going to have to practice getting out of that tiny car when you're 6'7" to know what you're going to do. You need to sit through being challenged at checkpoints to have that real experience of what it's going to be like. But the training also needs to be appropriate for what you're doing. You know, a conference in Nairobi has got really different risks. It's got risks, but they're really different to kind of doing a food delivery program in Sudan. And I worry that with these such significant cuts, we're also going to kind of get put in a kind of one size fits all training that works for all environments and works for all people. And, you know, people are completely different, got completely different risks. You need to look at people as individuals, and particularly in terms of like doing those risk assessments, like one size isn't going to fit all when you're working with people of different nationalities, different genders, different characteristics, etc. So for me, like going to Somalia as a white Western woman, that's a really, really different risk from my friend Sadiq, who works there every day and is from
Yeah.
And like, you need to listen to people and understand their risks. We need to keep our risk assessments really inclusive. People are not always going to say what their risks are, but the more inclusive we keep it, say like, this is a safe space, this is the law here, this is where you can go to for support. We're going to keep people that don't want to disclose parts about their characteristics safer. Organizations need to know what they're going to do when something goes wrong. A lot of organizations sit on the basis of, we really haven't had a major incident, probably not very likely. We've got a really good insurance policy with International SOS. It'll be fine. Organizations need to prepare for, okay, what are your risks? How are you going to respond? So that's things like crisis testing. And again, with kind of like those cuts, you're not going to see organizations test their responses. Travelers need to know what you're going to do when they say to you, okay, if there is an incident of sexual violence here, who do I call and what will you do? If your response is, oh, we'll call International SOS and rely on them, it's quite frankly not good enough.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, a lot of that, and I think it's critical, what you're saying is front loaded. It's the preparation element, and it's the asking the questions, what if? Like, what if? Because we all like to go out each day. And I mean, if it'd be really bleak if you went out every day going, it's going to happen, like it's going to happen, then, and so there is a degree of we just go and go, no, it probably won't happen. But it's always nice to have it in the back of your mind. This is what I'm going to do if it does happen. You know, even just going to the shops, something really basic. But when we're in an environment where it's not just going to shops, and the thing that might happen might be a whole lot worse than I forgot my shopping bag, it is vital. I worry that with the cuts that you're talking about, training is always the first thing to get cut. And despite the work that I've been doing, I will always argue that in-person training is the best thing.
Yeah.
It will always be, because it's one, I mean, you get the right instructor, facilitated, but actually it's the experiences of the group. You might stand up there as the instructor, okay, but you're really there. If you're only good at what you do, you're a facilitator. You might be an expert in your field, but the chances are the combined experience of that room is going to absolutely dwarf what you've ever done. So yeah, the facilitator or the groups are going to be what win the training element, in my view.
I think the best facilitators that you get in training as well know that the answers are already in the room, and it's just about unlocking of those. You gave the example of a woman who didn't want a briefing on the AV vehicle. Like, she knew what to do, but she had the answers for that. She can tell you more than you know. And the same on those hostile environment awareness courses. It's people that say, when my colleague was a survivor of sexual violence, this wasn't in place, and you need it because this is what she had to go through, and I don't want to ever see that again. And we learn from the room. And I completely agree. Whilst I myself do a lot of online training, and it can be really good, there's absolutely no substitute for getting a mixed, diverse group together and talking about how we can keep ourselves and our programs and our assets and our organizations safe.
Awesome. Anna, this has been an absolute pleasure. So thank you very much. You're scheduled for half an hour. I'm glad to say we've rolled into 45 minutes, which is awesome. I suspect we could go even longer, but this has been absolutely brilliant. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, look forward to the next podcast and probably part 2 at some stage.